Today I'm going to show you some of the features of the all-new CoreBlox toolbox for CA's SSO product. The toolbox utilizes CA SSO's built-in APIs to help you simplify and easily manage complex SSO architectures with multiple tiers and multiple SSO deployments from a single user-friendly interface. The toolbox is a single web application running on your private infrastructure that contains a set of individual tools: the migration tool, the snapshot tool, the optimization tool, and the cloning tool. As I walk you through the migration tool, you will see how easy it is to move complex SSO objects from one environment to another while reducing the risk of human error. You will also see how these migrations can be shared and reused. Once we've seen the migration process, we will then take a look at the snapshot tool. A snapshot captures a complete picture of the objects in a policy store at a specific point in time. The snapshot tool allows you to create a snapshot and restore or roll back a policy store to its previously captured state. Following the snapshot tool, we'll go over the reports generated by the optimization tool. The optimization tool uses a customizable rule set to analyze a policy store and report back possible areas for improvement according to CA's recommended best practices, and once customized, your own organization's preferences. After the optimization tool, we'll take a look at the cloning tool, which is especially useful during an upgrade process. The cloning tool allows a user to move all of the objects from one policy store to another seamlessly with just a few clicks. We will also walk through some of the role-based access control features that the toolbox offers. The toolbox allows administrators strict control over which users have access to which toolbox assets, such as environments and saved migrations, and what those users are allowed to do with those assets. This approach enables organizations to give specific roles to specific teams or individuals in order to protect the integrity of their SSO architecture. The toolbox is easy to deploy. For SSO version 12.7 and above, all that is required is to unzip the install package to a server with network access to your SSO environment, and then launch the toolbox services. Toolbox comes automatically configured with a super user account, which allows an administrator to perform all necessary configurations for your specific architecture from the Toolbox user interface. For older versions of SSO, a Docker image is also provided, which contains a backwards compatible service for accessing CA's SSO APIs. Now let's take a look at the Toolbox itself. I'm logging in as a super user with full privileges for this part of the demo. Later on, we'll see what happens when I log in as a lower level user. Here we see the Toolbox Launchpad. As new tools are added to the Toolbox in subsequent releases, they will show up here. Currently we see the Migration tool, the Snapshot tool, the Optimization tool, and the Clone tool. At any time, we can also access the administrative pages by clicking the Admin button to the left. For now, let's take a closer look at the Migration tool. First, we see a list of saved migrations. As users create and save migrations, they will show up here for any other users with permission to view those migrations. These migrations can be opened and reused with different settings, or could simply be used for record-keeping purposes. All of these migrations and all the other assets created by the Toolbox are stored in a central database that comes bundled with the Toolbox. Rather than reuse a saved migration, let's walk through the process of creating a new migration. Let's start by giving our migration a name. Next, we'll pick a source and destination environment. The source environment is where you will pull your SSO objects from, and the destination environment is where you want those objects to go after the migration completes. The scenario for this demo is that we are trying to maintain a 3-tier Dev, QA, and Prod architecture, and this migration will move some objects we've been testing from our Dev environment into our QA environment. The environments in these two dropdowns were configured earlier using the Toolbox UI. We'll go over how that's done later in the demo. After we've picked our source and destination environments, we can then configure some of the transformations that will happen to the objects before they are sent to the destination environment. Say, for example, that I have different naming schemes between my Dev and QA environments. All my development objects include the word Dev in them, but in my QA environment, they all include QA. The migration tool helps you make these kinds of simple automated transformations by allowing the user to find and replace as many strings in object names as are required to preserve any such scheme. The tool also allows for prepending and appending specific strings to all object names that are included in this migration. In addition to transformation on names, users can also replace specific strings in URL fields in any objects included in the migration. Say, for example, all of our development environment domains were dev.mycompany.com and our QA environments domains were qa.mycompany.com. All references to dev.mycompany.com can automatically be replaced with qa.mycompany.com using the migration tool. The migration tool allows you to choose from a set of 6 common high-level object types to move over. During the migration process, all lower-level objects that make up that higher-level object are also moved over. The migration tool ensures that there are no orphaned objects or unsatisfied object references once the migration is complete. Every required object is moved over in the proper order to keep the target environment from rejecting subsequent objects based on a bad reference. For this migration, we will be moving over a federation object. You can choose multiple objects if you wish, but this time we just want a single federation object. We'll also include an agent config object. Let's take a closer look at the agent config. The toolbox allows you to make changes to common fields within each object. In this case, it is the ACO's attributes. We won't make any manual changes during this migration, but there are some URL values that should be updated by the transformation engine before the object is sent to the target environment. We see this change in the preview section below, which shows us what the migration tool expects to happen once the migration is executed. We see the fed object being added because it doesn't exist in the target environment. The ACO, however, does exist and will be updated with some new values. The actions that you see in the preview pane do not just affect the parent objects, they also affect the child objects that are also going to be moved over. In fact, the migration tool can deal with an object which includes some new child objects and some existing child objects. One example would be an application that is new but references a user directory that exists in both the dev environment and the QA environment. The application will be added, but the user directory will be automatically updated to reflect any changes made in the source environment. The toolbox user doesn't have to worry about what is or isn't in the target environment versus what's in the source environment. The user tells the migration tool, "I want this object on the target environment," and the tool makes it happen. Before we run the migration, we can save it for later. Now let's run it. Now let's take a look at those two objects in the source and target admin UIs. Both federation objects are the same. If you decide that you don't want these objects in your target environment after all, and you want an easy way to put everything back the way it was, that's where snapshots come in handy. Before any migration logic happened, a snapshot of the target environment was automatically created. Now let's take a look. As I've said before, a snapshot is a record of the state of a policy store at a given point in time, which can be used to roll back any changes to that policy store since the snapshot was taken. Here we see a list of all the snapshots my user has access to. Down at the bottom of the list is a snapshot that was just created as part of our migration. Once the snapshot record loads, we can see when it was taken, which environment it was generated from, and exactly what's in it. We can also choose to roll the environment back to the state captured in the snapshot. Let's do that now. Now that it's done, let's take a look at the QA environment in the admin UI once again. As we can see, the fed object we added with our migration is gone and the policy store is as it was prior to the migration. Now let's take a look at the optimization tool. The optimization tool is designed to generate reports based on a customizable set of rules intended to detect inefficiencies in a policy store. The interface is very simple. All a user has to do is to select an environment to evaluate and then click View Optimization Report. The optimization tool has two types of rules, basic rules and advanced rules. First, we'll take a look at basic rules. Basic rules deal with the numeric values of specific object fields for specific object types. Boundaries are defined in the rules for these values along with recommended changes and explanations which appear in the generated report. Here you can see some anonymized data from a client who had some old default values still in place that needed to be updated and were picked up by the optimization engine. If the user disagrees with the value range or the suggested values, they can tailor the rules XML file to their own application's requirements. New object types and fields can even be added with your own value ranges and suggested values. Next, let's take a look at the advanced results. This table is the result of running our advanced rule set against this organization's policy store. The advanced rules look for 3 areas of improvement. One is bad references in the policy store. As you can see, there were a couple found in this store, a realm and a policy that referenced bad OIDs. The optimization tool will also report when there are too many child objects within a parent object. In this case, they had too many realms in a domain, 270 realms in a single domain to be exact, and too many rules inside of a realm. The optimization tool also looks for instances where CA's recommended best practices aren't being followed. In this case, the client was using default object and agent name in their multi-agent ACOs instead of using agents, which can negatively impact performance. Next, let's take a look at the cloning tool. The clone tool's interface is also very simple. A user simply selects an environment to clone and then selects the target environment. The target environment's policy store will be completely overwritten with the source environment's policies. Nothing from the target's original policy store will remain once the cloning process is complete. A common use case for this tool is if an organization needs to create a pristine QA environment that accurately mimics their production environment. The organization can start with a fresh target or even reuse their existing, more cluttered QA environment as the target. Just like with the migration tool, the clone tool will take a snapshot of the target environment before any changes are made so that a user can roll the target back to its original state if so desired. Let's see the tool in action. The prod environment has now been cloned into our QA environment. Now, with all this power to make changes to SSO environments, we needed to give administrators a way to limit that power so that only trusted users were able to make changes to SSO environments, or even the toolbox itself. The toolbox uses a role-based access control scheme which attaches specific privileges or roles to groups. Any users within these groups are granted the privilege level of the group. Groups also have control over specific toolbox assets such as environments, migrations, and snapshots. If a user's group does not have access to an environment, production for example, then they will never see that environment as a choice in their migrations and won't be able to make any changes to that environment. The same goes for snapshots and saved migrations. Let's take a look at some of the roles a group can have by creating a new group with limited access and only a few assets. Here we see a list of all the current groups we can manage. Let's create a new one. Let's name the group Staging, since its users will only be able to create migrations but not actually run them. As you can see, this group's users will only be able to create and manage migrations but won't be able to execute them. The users in this group won't be able to create or make changes to environments, accounts, or even take or execute snapshots. Now that the group is created, let's give it access to a couple of environments. In this view, you can see the list of assets the group has access to. It has none right now. Let's say that I want to make this group aware of the dev and QA environments. In order to do this, I need to select Edit at the bottom of the page. Remember that this group will only be able to see what's in those environments and create migrations that uses objects from those environments, but they won't actually be able to make changes to these environments since they can't execute migrations or snapshots. Now we see every asset in the toolbox database that can be assigned to a group. Any environment, migration, or snapshot can be selected. Let's select the dev and QA environments as well as an old migration that we may want the group's users to be able to use. Once that's done, we'll update the group's set of assets. Now let's create a user and add them to this group. This part is simple enough. We give the user a name, a password, and select the group we want them to belong to. We can also create a new group from this screen just like we did earlier if needed. Now let's log in as this user and see what they can do. As you can see, the user only has access to a single saved migration. If I go to create a migration as this user, I'll only have access to the dev and QA environments, and the execute button will be disabled. If I try to make any administrative changes, I'll only be able to see a read-only view of the environments I have access to. I won't even see any buttons related to account settings. Let's log back in as a higher privileged user so that I can show you how environments are managed. Environments and their management are fairly simple. They require the IP and port that the admin UI is running on, as well as an SSO administrator's credentials. To edit an environment, select it from the drop-down and click Update. To create a new environment, click Create New. To delete an environment, select it from the drop-down and click Delete.